Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. Today in the news, let me give you a little bit about what's going on in Israel. And we keep telling you about some of these things that are happening, but I really want you to get familiar with this. And we've been talking about it quite a few times. But this one's another article that just came out again. And sometimes it sounds repetitive, but I really want you to understand the progression of what's going on here. This one says, all Palestinian factions agree a Palestinian state will be a terror state. So you can read this chart. It says a Palestinian state like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other Islamic countries will not have or allow a single Jew to live there. Muhammad Abbas has said that, the president of Palestine, if you would. While the Biden administration and the European Union were working on creating a Palestinian state, the real details were being fleshed out in Moscow, where the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and other terrorist groups were meeting. The summit brought together Azam al-Hamada, a member of the PLO Executive Committee, and Musa Abu Marzouk, a top Hamas leader, as well as representative for Islamic Jihad, the PFLP, the DFLP, and other terror groups. So what did they do? Well, they got together, and what they want to do is they want to have what they call a technocratic government. And that sounds like a big word, and it is, but they are trying to get the rest of the world involved. I'm going to just give you a summation of this article. They want to get the rest of the world involved to back them. Now again, remember, these are mostly terrorist organizations. And what is a technocratic government? It's a front for the terrorists and composed of non-profit executives, academics, economists, and others who have experience dealing with the international community and extracting foreign aid for them. So it is really a money arm of really jihadists, a money arm of radicals, of terrorists. And so they're getting some legitimacy, especially in Moscow, which is kind of interesting to me prophetically, because we see that Gog and Magog are going to have some type of power coming into Israel from the Ezekiel 38 towards the end days. And so all these characters are starting to coalesce together. The only actual point of unity for the Islamic terrorist group that met in Moscow was fighting Israel. Their number one objective was to wipe Israel out off the face of the earth. Now, that's amazing to me, because you have a lot of people are talking about Palestine from the river to the sea, which is a genocide of the Jews. And now you have an international community of executives and money men that want to be able to put together a technocratic Palestine. And again, the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. Oh, they'll play games with the Biden administration and the rest of the international community, and they're eager to solve the problems, obviously, that was created by October 7th, while doubling down on a two-state solution and creating a Palestinian state. Will be a Palestinian terror state. You give Palestine more land and more opportunity, and they'll use that to be able to wipe out Israel. So a Palestinian state, the terrorist groups have already announced, will be a terror state. They've already said that. And again, you're not hearing that in the news. You're not hearing it in the sanitized liberal press of America. You're not hearing it in any of the media of America. We are not getting fed the right thing. We're getting fed absolutely the wrong thing. Also about Israel, let me give you this one, and not so glum. This is kind of interesting. A 2,000-year-old coin was engraved with Eleazar the priest, was uncovered in Israel this past week. So archaeologists in Israel have uncovered a 2,000-year-old coin that dates to a century before the birth of Christ and bears the name Eleazar the priest, a biblical name that experts say most likely references a religious leader of the time. So what time would that be? About 132 to 135 BC, the time of the Maccabees. The Maccabees, and you'll know the Bar Kokhba revolt happened around that time. It was a Jewish rebellion against the Roman occupation. And to find this coin is really interesting, because Josephus tells us the high priest at that time, his name was Eleazar. And so it's kind of interesting to know that, again, confirming the Bible. Let me go a little bit further and tell you a little bit more about the economy. All these, obviously these categories I have are based on Matthew 24, and in Revelation and prophecy, when it says you can't buy or sell. So that's why we look with a fine-tooth comb at the economy and the economies of the world. This is a very interesting article that came out this Monday. America's economic cleanup doesn't look very good. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Tuesday that the Consumer Price Index, that's the CPI, the usual measure for inflation, increased 0.4% from January to February. That's just 1 month. While it increased 3.2% from February 2023 to February 2024. Core inflation also increased 0.4% from January to February and rose to 3.8% from last February. So if you listen to Biden's State of the Union address, He'd like to tell you that everything's great, there's lots of jobs, inflation's going down. It's an absolute lie. He should have had a big Pinocchio nose on, because that's all he did through the State of the Union was lie to us. The CPI score is far higher than the 2% inflation economists recommended and believe would happen. In the 3 years since from January 2021 to January 2024, Biden's administration, inflation rose, you ready? 18%, an average of 6% each year. So don't believe when anybody tells you that inflation is going down. It is not. The economic pain of inflation is lost purchasing power, is cumulative to consumers. So consumer necessities are painfully expensive, and no one has to tell you that. The percentage of disposable income that you make and you can just spend on whatever you want, Americans spend on food, increased to 12.7% in 2022, the sharpest annual increase on record. Food now consumes 11.3% of the average American budget. That's the highest level in 30 years. We don't have to tell you this. And I don't know how they think that they could tell us it's not happening when you take the money out of your paycheck and pay for those things. Home prices are even more painful. The average price of houses sold in the United States increased from $384,600, that's the average, in the fourth quarter of 2019 to $552,600 in the fourth quarter of 2022. What does that mean? It means that a house that cost you $384,600 in the fourth quarter, the end of 2019, cost you same house, $552,600 at the end, the fourth quarter of 2022. That's a 44% increase over 3 years, 14.5% annually. So we're getting hit, we're getting nailed. And obviously paychecks aren't going up that much. They're not going up at all, as a matter of fact. There were 2.7 million more people working in the U.S. in the fourth quarter of 2023 than in the fourth quarter of 2019. However, there were 183,000 fewer U.S.-born workers and 2.9 million more foreign-born workers. So when Biden and his administration tells you that there's more people in the labor force and the workforce, he's right, but they're not Americans. Most of them are illegals. So according to the BLS, there were 2.34 million more foreign-born workers in February 2024 than in February 2023. But U.S.-born workers decreased by 741,000 people over that same period of time. So a number of studies show a link between not working and crime, as well as mental health issues and failure to form families. So-called deaths of despair, including suicides, drug overdoses, alcoholism, are much higher among those that are not in the labor force. So the illegals that are coming in that have not taken jobs are the ones that are not in the labor force, and those have a higher increase of crime. So White House budget proposes the wrong remedy. What do they want to do about it? Well, the White House's proposed budget for fiscal 2025 assumes trillion-dollar deficits in perpetuity. It's almost $5 trillion in tax hikes over a decade. It's more than $2 trillion. It's more spending on the woke and green agendas. You don't have to file those taxes directly for it to show up in your wallet through higher prices, lower wage growth, fewer job opportunities, and slower economic growth. It's hard to imagine a combination more guaranteed to spark inflation, make necessities less affordable, and kill jobs. And so we're watching our economy go down the tubes quick. Another one on the economy is the cost to maintain the same standard of living keeps skyrocketing. The price for some of the things that normally you would buy have doubled. Of course, the soaring cost of living is the direct result of decisions that obviously our leaders have made. They just keep borrowing, spending, and flooding the system with money as a sure guarantee for inflation. And now the cost of living is widely out of control. According to CBS News, on average, U.S. households must now spend an extra $11,434 per year just to maintain the same standard of living that they were enjoying when Joe Biden first took office. This is absolutely insane. Virtually everything that Americans spend money on regularly has skyrocketed during the Biden administration. Just look at the price of gasoline, now 60% higher than it was during the last presidential election in November 2020. Of course, housing costs have gone up even faster. I couldn't believe this when I read it, so I had to check it out. Checked it out in 3 different sources, and it's true. A 54 square foot apartment, that's about 10 foot by 5.5 foot space. Now, again, I want to reiterate it because it's shocking. A 54 square foot apartment, that's just a tiny little space, 10 by 5.5. In New York City, doesn't even have a bathroom, is renting, are you ready for it? $1,200 a month. Could not believe that. Here's the quote. Tiny studio apartment in New York City that consists of just one room, has no bathroom, no kitchen or running water, has been furiously slated online after it was revealed the asking price for the cell-like property is a staggering $1,200 a month. It's a cell. Is this what they mean when they tell us that we will own nothing and be happy? Of course, most Americans aren't happy about the current state of affairs at all, and they probably will show that come November. They're quite aware that the cost of living has been rising much faster than their paychecks have, and that's definitely not good news for the Biden team. Inflation is always the enemy of the incumbent. It doesn't matter who you are or who's in the White House when there's inflation. People go to the voting booth remembering what it cost them for their cornflakes and milk in that morning and what it cost to fill up their car to drive there. And they vote against that. But if you think that inflation is bad now, just wait until the coming war with China erupts if it does. Once trade across the Pacific comes to a standstill, there will be a whole lot of money chasing a rapidly dwindling level of goods in our stores. So having a lot of money and not being able to buy anything is one of the definitions of inflation. The employment market will be another major issue in November. The massive tsunami of layoffs that we've been witnessing just continues all along. For example, on Monday, this past Monday, we learned that John Deere, usually a stable company, will be laying off 150 workers in a facility in Iowa. Sticking with Iowa, Tyson just announced that it will be giving an axe to over 1,000 workers at one of their plants in the state. The move comes after the Arkansas-based company closed 2 chicken plants and announced job cuts last year and said 4 other plants were expected to cease operations within the first half of 2024 with related charges. Another 77 Rite Aid stores will close as part of the retailer's voluntary bankruptcy. Even more thrift-conscious stores are having great difficulty making it. Family Dollar, the discount chain that caters to low-income customers, predominantly in cities, said past Wednesday, it will close 1,000 stores. Overall, nearly 107 million Americans do not have a job right now. Now, we only have 350 million Americans in the country. 107 million don't have jobs right now. That number will inevitably go higher during the months ahead. Needless to say, the cost of living is going to continue to skyrocket and increase as well. Prices are already absurdly high, but they're only going to escalate from here. And that's really bad news for all of us. So people ask me all the time, Pastor Mark, what do I do? Well, get out of debt, number one. That's the first thing you need to do, especially with credit cards. Credit cards are not credit cards. They're not helping you if you have unpaid balances. They're actually banks. They're charging some of them actually 32% interest on unpaid balances from one month to another. So get out of credit card debt. There's lots of things you can do after that, but that's the main thing we need to do. You need to do, and get out of whatever debt you possibly can get out of. I know there's some that's inevitable, but get your debt ceiling down, because when the crunch comes, people are going to lose a lot of things. I hate to say that, but it looks like the writing's on the wall. Let me give you a little bit more on what's going on as we head into some of these categories. Let's talk about the moral decay. And boy, I could spend a whole lot of time on this. I purposely do not, because you don't need to hear a whole lot more about trans and the things that are happening with the LGBTQ community. We've been stuffed day and night with that stuff. And again, I'm going to reiterate what I say. I do not watch the news. And that may seem strange to most of you because I talk about it every week. I do a lot of vetting and I do a lot of research to get the news, but I won't watch cable news because it's an endless cycle of the same thing. And basically it's one pitting against another, and I'm not interested in it. And it's degrading. It pulls you down. So I would suggest you don't watch the news. So how do you get your news? Well, welcome to our news study. Welcome to our study in the news based on prophecy. Here it is. The collapse of cultural Christianity and the rise of cultural queerness. How do nations become post-Christian? Well, to quote Ernest Hemingway, he said, gradually and then suddenly. For decades, the United States has been a bastion of religiosity, bucking the trend of secularization. But in recent years, the needle has begun to move quickly. According to a 2019 poll, between 20 and 25 of American adults now identify as nuns. You've heard me say it before. No church affiliation. Now, what else is going on with that? Well, respondents in that poll identified as either agnostic or atheist. It's a sea change in religious identification. Let's unpack it. Consider that a 2017 study found that only 11% of Americans claim to have read the entire Bible. 11% of Americans, meaning that a whopping 89% of Americans have never read the Bible. Even Americans who still identify as Christians are abandoning any semblance of orthodoxy, with 40% of American Christians claiming that the Bible is ambiguous on abortion. 34% reject the Bible's definition of marriage, and another 34% claiming abortion is morally acceptable. I have one group to blame for that. It's pastors. Pastors need to talk about what's sin. They need to talk about what the Bible says. We're losing our orthodoxy. We have people going to church, but they're losing their orthodoxy. They're losing their convictions of what they stand for. There are many reasons for the rise of the nuns, by the way, but one is that many who had merely identified as Christian as a nod to their heritage or culture without actually believing any of its tenets are now abandoning the labels as it becomes socially inconvenient. It's socially inconvenient to be a Christian today in America because you're looked down on. Until recently, identifying as some sort of Christian was a positive. That's why elites such as Barack Obama did so. But as it becomes a net negative, many are switching their allegiance to the new cultural elites. This is especially true of younger Americans who have come of age cut off from their civilization and inheritance and deformed by the public education system. Remember the 60s? Remember the sexual 60s and everything goes in the 60s? Those kids from the 60s that had free sex and free drug are now the professors in universities. And they are the ones that for the last several decades have been indoctrinating our kids. For example, around a quarter of Generation Z identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or genderqueer, while just a few years ago, less than 3% of the population identified as on the LGBT spectrum. And by the way, don't believe everything you hear on that, because I'm going to tell you a little bit of a difference. In short, the upcoming generation of Americans increasingly views religious freedom as overt bigotry. Identification with the LGBT movement is undergoing an astronomical rise. Identification with Christianity is plummeting. I believe we're now in a post-Christian America. And by the way, when the baby boomers die off, like me and a lot of people that I know, America's going to be in big trouble. In 2023, 38% of Brown University students' population identified as LGBT, with many simply identifying as other, up from 14% a decade earlier. Now, although LGBT activists like to claim that a more accepting culture has allowed more people to come out of the closet, the data really tells a different story. What we find when we poll is that identity is rising much faster than behavior. Let me repeat that. Identity is rising much faster than behavior. That means people identify as lesbian, bisexual, or gay, but they don't have that behavior. Now, why would they do that? Well, they want to be culturally significant. They want to be included in the culture. So it indicates that people with occasional rather than sustained feelings or attraction to the opposite sex are increasingly identifying as LGBTQ. What's even more likely is that vague terms like queer are allowing straight kids to obtain a status and privilege that now come with identifying as LGBT without actually engaging in same-sex behavior. This is absolutely ridiculous and it's absolutely insane. They want to identify as that, but they don't necessarily practice that. Well, let me break it down to you. In the 60s, when I grew up as a teenager, our way to rebel was long hair and Vietnam jackets and just dressing a certain way. That was our way of rebelling against the system. It wasn't sinful. It was strange, but it wasn't sinful. Every generation has a way of rebelling. The rebellion that's coming now is sinful. It's a rebellion that goes into the market of sex in a bad way. Now again, that happened in the 60s, and yes, that was sinful. But most kids rebelled didn't necessarily go out and have sex all the time. Now, it's not just having sex all the time, it's with different partners. And, as this article says, sometimes it's not even having sex with those people of the same sex. It's just saying that you identify as that. It's pretty scary when you think about it. Let me give you an Exhibit A. Michaela Kennedy Cuomo, you know that name, daughter of the former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. In 2021, she came out as queer. Less than a month later, she announced that she was demisexual, whatever that means. And it's defined as, I'm not making this up by the way, quote, a sexual orientation in which a person feels sexually attracted to someone only after they've developed a close emotional bond with them. That's ridiculous. But these stats are also indicate a sheer scale of the LGBT movement near total victory is not only mainstreaming their ideology, but achieving cultural dominance in key institutions, being accepted by everyone in the secular world. A crucial sign of that dominance is the fact that so many young people desperately want to identify with that movement. Cultural Christians are rapidly disappearing. Cultural queers are replacing them. I have one statement to say to that. Not in my house. Not in where I preach. I'm going to continue to preach Christianity because it's the only thing that'll save a soul and the only thing that'll give you happiness and joy in your life. Let's go a little bit further and let's talk about the planet. We're told that the Earth is going to show signs towards the end of the age, and there's earthquakes all the time on the planet. Don't get me wrong, but the frequency and the occasion of earthquakes is increasing exponentially. Earthquake swarms off Pacific coast, raising new concerns. And I'm going to share some things about the planet tonight that's pretty shocking. After me researching it, it even shocked me, and I know a lot about it. An area off the coast of Washington State, Western United States, is being shaken by hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes. Scientists are telling us that the quakes are centered around a large underwater volcano. An enormous earthquake along the Cascadian subduction zone, where one plate goes under another, if it were to trigger a giant tsunami that slams at the west coast, that would be a historic disaster of epic proportions. The frequency of earthquakes that we are now witnessing off the coast of Washington is extremely alarming, according to seismologists. It's being reported that earlier this month there were as many as 200 earthquakes in a single hour. That's a lot of quakes. Scientists said there were more than 2,000 earthquakes detected in one single day. So why haven't we heard much about this? Because your media is too busy talking against Trump or talking about Biden or talking about things that really, I'm going to be real honest with you, don't matter. God will raise up one and put down another. God is sovereign. But these earthquakes, the things that are happening on our planet, are pretty shocking. And they're not saying anything about them. And I'll give you a little bit more details. So if I was living on the West Coast, I would definitely want this to be in the news. But it's not even on the West Coast. We're being told that this great swarm of earthquakes, that's what they're calling them, potentially means that a magnetic rupture is imminent. Not can happen, it's imminent, any moment. A magnetic rupture, which occurs when the Earth's crust splits open for some reason and spills out molten rock, is a natural phenomenon that can form new ocean floors. And most of the times, it's in the ocean that happens. But what happens if it's an extremely large earthquake is triggered along the Cascadia subduction zone, along a great land masses? Well, no one wants to see the end of this round of what's going to happen. The majority of the public, as well as most governments in the Northwest, aren't yet pushing to implement the extensive infrastructure changes that early warning communications systems needed to save tens of thousands of lives. They're doing nothing about it, and it's going to come. Such an earthquake potentially create a colossal tsunami that is, are you ready for it? Hundreds of feet high. Not tens of feet high, hundreds of feet high. A tsunami of that magnitude would cause destruction on a scale that most of us can't even imagine right now. The magnitude would be somewhere between 8.7 and 9.2. That's a very big one. By the time the shaking has ceased and the tsunami has receded, the region of the Northwest will be absolutely unrecognizable. Scientists are telling us, and seismologists, everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast. And you may not know where that is. Let me explain it. The Pacific Northwest, everything west of Interstate 5 covers some 140,000 square miles. It includes Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, Eugene, Salem, which is the capital of Oregon, Olympia, the capital of Washington, and some 7 million people. It would be the greatest natural disaster in the entire recorded history of our nation up to that point. And again, seismologists are saying it's imminent, and our government's doing absolutely nothing about it. Now, our planet is becoming so unstable that we are seeing very strange things happen all over the globe. I read that line, and I thought, wait a second, let me check, let me see. And so I started doing more research, and what I found is absolutely shocking. For example, very long and deep cracks in the ground have started to appear in Libya. That's a giant earth crack. That thing runs 10 miles. The earth is splitting open in Libya. Deep earth cracks have suddenly appeared in an agricultural region south of Tripoli, Libya, causing alarm along the local population. In response, Libyan government has initiated an investigation and dispatched a specialized geological team, because it's not happened like that. Yeah, she'll have a little bit of a fissure and a crack every now and then, but this thing's massive. So I started to do a little bit more. I wonder if there's any more places. I had to stop after I saw 6 massive ones. Let me show you what I found. This is 2 huge earthquakes open up in Jalisco, Mexico. That's an earthquake crack. That's not surface, that goes all the way down. I found them in Pakistan. Giant earth cracks opened up in Pakistan, sparking fears among locals. I found it in Kenya. Giant 3-mile long earth crack opens up in Kenya. And Africa is literally splitting apart. Africa is splitting in two as new ocean forms, researchers say. Shifting tectonic plates have been splitting the continent since the East African Rift, a 35-mile long crack in the Ethiopian desert. You want to see what they're projecting it's going to be like? That's it. They're saying that the eastern part of Africa is going to split away and a new ocean is going to form. I can't tell you how horrific the effects in the entire world will be when you displace that much water and that much land. So there were reports that the earthquake was felt in Tiberias this weekend, in the Jordan Valley, Carmel, Haifa, and the Hadera area in Israel. Today, a magnitude 5.8 earthquake that shook the Fukushima prefecture in Japan made lots of headlines. That was yesterday, as a matter of fact. Let me tell you what that means to me when I read those things. You know, the Roman says, you know that when the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. He's talking about the end of the age. And then we have the upcoming solar eclipse, which has raised concerns of potential cataclysmic and catastrophic events, including seismic activity and natural disasters. Whenever the moon is affected, the moon affects tides, which affects the plate tectonics. The gravitational pull of the sun and the moon produces the tides, so it makes sense gravity could affect all plate tectonics in the entire world and potentially trigger earthquakes. With the upcoming solar eclipse, listen to this, the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon will all be aligned and potentially could have the greatest effect. So an eclipse is, right now, the solar eclipse is when the Earth gets in between the Sun and the Moon, and we will have a solar eclipse. Now, let me just tell you that it's pretty shocking. So based on that, let's talk about that eclipse. Before we talk about the eclipse, let's talk about something else that's happening in the heavens this month. If you go out in early sunset, right after sunset, early dusk, you can see with the naked eye right now a comet that they have dubbed the Devil Comet. Now, if you know anything about comets, they all come in across stars. They have two spots where they come around. These comets, the comets we see, come from someplace called the Oort cloud, O-O-R-T. It's outside of our galaxy, past Pluto, outside the rings of our galaxy. There's an Oort cloud. It's a broken up planet that rotates around our sun. Beyond that is where comets come from. We see them coming in sometimes. Sometimes we don't. They come and they access around our sun and they go back out. This one, called the Devil Comet, returns every 71 years. This time when it comes in, and it had two horns, you can see it right there. That's why they call it the Devil Planet. It was Devil Comet. It was 3 times the size of Mount Everest, and it looked triangular when it was coming. We didn't see it until a couple months ago. It had potential, scientists got afraid, to hit the Earth, because if our orbit's in the right spot, one of these comets, it's absolutely a miracle that a comet hasn't hit us. Carl Sagan, an agnostic, said that. He said the Earth is like driving down a highway at 70 miles an hour with other vehicles coming across you at 70 miles an hour, and they're all missing you. One of these days it's going to hit. We know it's going to hit. It's called Wormwood. But this one came in. It blew off the two horns as it started to get closer to the sun. The heat started to melt the ice and blew it off. It's an ice ball, actually, and it became round. But as it comes back around the sun, which will be in April, around the same time as the eclipse, interesting, it will glow green. Now, these comets never glow green. So a Devil Comet, known for its occasional outbursts, is currently visible in the night sky right now. And lucky stargazers can be able to spot the celestial object during the next month's much anticipated solar eclipse. It'll be happening pretty much at the same time. It's actually Comet 12P Pons Brooks, which was named after those people that found it. It's called the Devil Comet because an eruption last year left it with 2 distinct trails of gas and ice in the shape of devil horns. But it blew off those horns. And now it just appears as green. And that's how you'll see it in the night sky. You need to look real close, get away from lights, and you'll find it. By the end of the month, the comet may be visible to the naked eye again as it swings through its inner solar system and reaches its closest point to the sun in mid-April. And by the way, this thing is going to be amazing. Let's talk about the upcoming solar eclipse. So, the upcoming solar eclipse on April 8th will darken the sky for millions as the moon passes in front of the sun, but the spectacle could also affect how much solar power gets generated. So, I probably said it the wrong way, I think. So the sun's here, The Earth's here, and the moon will pass between the Earth and the sun. It'll block out the sun. The amazing thing about it is the sun is billions of times bigger than the moon. The moon is very small compared to the sun, but it has the exact shape needed to block out the entire sun. That had to be a God thing. And so it'll move in between us and the sun and block it out, a total solar eclipse. Seen throughout the United States, not throughout, the umbra, the darkest part, will be seen on a path from Texas all the way to Maine. The problem is Texas is now saying that their solar power may be affected by it. So now we have a solar, that won't be affected long, but it may be affected. So what am I saying with all these things? Well, let's talk about eclipses. The New Testament, when did Herod the Great die? I'm not going to read it all for you. I'm going to tell you what this is. Josephus is quoting here, and he says this. Well, what happened was in 4 BC, Herod erected a giant eagle in the temple. It made the Jews go absolutely wild. There was a false god in the temple. Well, 2 priests went absolutely crazy about it and started a revolt along with 40 others. Herod killed those 2 priests, and he killed the 40 others. At that time, an eclipse happened, a total solar eclipse over Jerusalem. Several weeks later, Herod died. Jews believed it was the judgment of God. Then there's Jonah and the Bar-Segel eclipse. Again, I did this in 2017 when I did the Sign, the documentary that went over from Hollywood. When Jonah went to Nineveh, remember didn't want to go. When he eventually went, Nineveh rejected him, but then he repented. NASA tells us that was, I think, 793 BC. NASA says the Bar-Segel eclipse, total solar eclipse, came over Nineveh at the same time. We know when Jeroboam lived. We know the kings he lived under. NASA is not talking about Jeroboam. They're talking just about when it happened. It's the exact same month in Nisan that Jonah was there. So that eclipse was a sign of judgment. All of Nineveh repented. When Jesus died on the cross, we believe it was 29 AD. There was a total solar eclipse a couple months earlier. Not the eclipse that happened when he was on the cross, but a total solar eclipse a couple months later. And there was, again, judgment. What judgment? Jesus was judged for our sins. So what does a total solar eclipse mean when you view it or when it comes over a country? People ask me all the time. The Bible says the stars are for signs, seasons, and times. Signs. It's a sign. The antediluvians and the centuries ago and generations ago, they believed eclipses meant something. Well, they do. It's a sign of judgment or sign of war. Let me just throw another thing at you. Since the United States became a nation in 1776, only 8 total solar eclipses have completely crossed the continent. And when did they occur? Well, let me tell you a couple times they did. When the Revolutionary War started, when the Civil War started, when the Vietnam War started, total solar eclipse. The upcoming total solar eclipse will cross into the border of Canada, passing over a city. I told you the cities it's going to pass over in America. 7 Ninevehs, Egypt, 7 Salems, which is Jerusalem. And basically, when it comes out of America in the northeast, it's going to hit, the first city it's going to hit is called Economy Canada. Is it a judgment? Could it be that we're going to see economic tragedy coming to the whole world? It'll begin in the United States, but it'll reverberate throughout the world. I don't know, but I know this. According to God's orchestration, when a total solar eclipse comes, there's some type of judgment. What will it be? I don't know. But the sad part about it is most people will just pass it off. We can't afford to do that. God's warning America. America needs to come to its knees sooner or later. All right, that's in the news for tonight.